Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your look at the world of business and economics. This week, Nigeria. 2 recessions in 4 years, youth unemployment and insecurity getting worse. But there is one growth industry, kidnapping. The cheap guns flooding into the country, Nigeria's efforts to close the border just have not worked. Then there's the sabotage, theft and environmental concerns driving Shell to sell up and walk away from its onshore Nigerian oil operations. And even though countries around the Gulf of Guinea are stepping up security to fight off a rise in piracy, which country is still worse affected? Our focus this week is entirely Nigeria. So it's just the one topic this week, and we're very conscious that there is a lot of negative news here, but the fact is Nigeria is dealing with a lot at the moment, and it is all extremely consequential. Nigeria's economy is not in great shape, which means people look for alternatives, in some cases extreme alternatives. You remember back in 2014 when the militant group Boko Haram made global headlines for abducting nearly 300 schoolgirls from the town of Chibok? Well, it's still happening. More than 800 students have been kidnapped in the northwest of Nigeria since December, and these are separate from the Islamist insurgency centred on the northeast. Here's some detail for you. This is from the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. All these kidnapping events they've mapped out are just from the first 4 months of this year. That's after abduction and forced disappearance events more than doubled back in 2020. Now, here's a different interpretation on this bar chart. The pink spike that you see in 2014, that's when the Boko Haram Chibok kidnappings happened. But 2020 and 2021 saw a huge increase in abductions by communal militias. Those are the ones in blue. And more worryingly, abduction events in the first 4 months of this year have overtaken the total for last year. So not properly dealing with insurgency and kidnappings is part of Nigeria's problem. But the government's failure to grow the economy to accommodate the population, that's only making it worse. The economy of 206 million people fell into its second recession in 4 years. And more than 60% of Nigeria's working-age population is younger than 34. Problem is, unemployment for the 15 to 24-year-olds, that was 53% in the fourth quarter, and it was 37% for people aged between 25 and 34. So we're going to dive into a lot of issues this week. Oil, piracy, they're coming up later, but we're going to start with Nigeria's borders. The government shut them in 2019 to restrict the flow of illegal weapons. But last month, President Muhammadu Buhari surprised a lot of people when he said it had failed and was in fact fueling numerous conflicts. Our report is from Ahmed Idris in Seme, a town on the border between Nigeria and Benin.
This border market used to be a thriving commercial hub. It's now a shell of its former self. It was known for cheap imports like rice, automobiles and garments, but not anymore. It's been 6 months since Nigeria reopened its western land border with Benin. But people, like successful motorcycle dealer Omolayo Inwa, say they're having to find other work to make a living, and he's not happy.
If the government tell you the border is closed, they are telling lie. Because there's something is opened, it gives free passage of goods and people at that place. By the time you get to the border now, that border is not opened, it's remained closed. Because it's partially opening to some group of people in this country.
He says such favors have ruined small businesses like his, and by extension have hurt the economy. The head of a local traders union agrees.
No movement for market.
There's little activities at the market. Even the number of visitors reduced substantially. With incomes wiped out, people stay at home. And as such, you can't get the taxes.
Residents say even passenger traffic is not what it used to be.
The border closure was meant to reduce the import of food items to encourage domestic growth and stop the smuggling of firearms and illicit drugs into Nigeria. But after 1.5 years, the president admits that more arms came in during the ban, raising questions as to what it actually achieved.
Border officials, however, insist the shutdown was a resounding success, as there is cross-border collaboration and sharing of intelligence on smuggling.
There were a lot of seizures of prohibited items that would have found their ways into the country through illegal routes and all that. There were also arrests of irregular migrants, which could have complicated the security situations.
But enforcing the border rules has made it more expensive to live in communities like Seme. People here say numerous checkpoints are hurting the transportation of goods from across the border and other parts of Nigeria. The government reopened its borders just as the free trade agreement facilitated by the African Union was coming into force. But months later, business activity here has yet to pick up. Nigeria's government has accused its neighbors of endangering not only its economy, but also its security, saying weapons and ammunition still flow across the borders to feed its ever-growing conflicts.
So let's piece all of this together then. The government's been fighting Boko Haram in the northeast. There is an ongoing conflict between nomadic cattle herders and crop farmers in central and southern regions. There is a separatist rebellion in the southeast. What is all of this doing to Nigeria? Well, here is Sam Amadi to help us out. He is the director of the Abuja School of Social and Political Thoughts, and it's great to have you with us. Sam, look, the overall insecure situation right across the country, how much of this, in your opinion, actually rests with the government? Or is this just such a big problem that it's almost too big to get a hold on?
Well, I think a lot of it's with government because first, on two levels. At the national level, the general failure of governance create or produce enough social and economic goods means that there's stiff competition for the available resources. And then that is compounded by the system of governance that's unfair, in which government fails to understand the importance of equity and justice in generating, kind of consensus, even among political elites, and trust among other citizens. So the failure in the federal government to deal with economic crisis, to create a sense of belonging, and to really erode a growing sense of disaffection with the state is critical. Then at the subnational level, southeast, southwest, all part of the country, we see a terrible failure of subnational government, not just in their failure to tackle poverty, insecurity, but also in their corruption and greed, and the sense in which there's a real disconnection between the people and governance, and the criminalization of the state in terms of unfair policing, in terms of brutality, and that's what gave rise to the NSAS crisis. So primarily, this is the failure of governance.
There is some suggestion that the failure to act against some of those communal militias, which we talked about earlier, is because the president is part of those as well. Do you put any weight into that?
I think there is. I mean, if you look at before the president became president in 2015, in previous elections, he had kind of framed himself as a spokesperson for the North. And then getting to power, he did not try to create that sense of evenness. And so the Boko Haram, first, he spoke against Boko Haram being killed as a form of ethnic genocide. He again was nominated as the Boko Haram spokesperson or mediator during the time of the previous government. And so when he came to power, the image stuck. And again, he did not help in the way he managed the crisis. For example, the president has not spoken against Fulani herdsmen's violence, and has actually taken up governors who had themselves done something to deal with those challenges. So in a sense, his body language, his pedigree, and some of the policies and the public statement he has made suggest and perhaps reinforce the perception that he has been maybe kidding with Boko Haram generally, and of course perhaps showing some degree of partiality towards the insurgencies in the north. And the way he treated the IPOB was prohibited, prescribed even before this rise of violence for public protestation. But nobody up to today, neither the Boko Haram or the Fulani herdsmen that are dubbed the third and the fourth in the global terror list, have been officially prescribed as terror groups in Nigeria.
We have the Nigerian Federation, the whole country. We also have a lot of different regions. There is, again, some suggestion or talk about the idea that some regions could withdraw, like, say, the Biafra region. I mean, could they survive on their own?
I think it's very unfortunate that many parts of Nigeria are talking about secession so many years after the civil war that was very regrettable. I think there's also some degree of consensus that we are better together. But I would say that the last 6 years have heightened a sense of withdrawal among some ethnic groups. For example, the Ufuoma Republic advocacy was really absent throughout the 1990s. President Obasanjo was in power, and Goodluck Jonathan. Now we've seen radicalization and, in fact, vehemence, sometimes led by intellectual leaders who are leading this separationist demand. And I guess the problem is simple. It's credible. It's becoming credible. But we need to deal with it at a level of national leadership that rescues and restores the country. The president's insistence that restructuring is nonsense fuels the vehemence and perhaps create public support for some of these regrettable secessionist bids. But primarily, the Nigerian state is falling apart, as many of the leaders have also pointed out. And what is needed now is a national dialogue, a sense of suspend politics, recreate the Nigerian nation in a sense in which every part feels greater commitment to it because of equity and justice. But I guess we shouldn't take for granted these, building secessionist bids, because the landscape is shifting, and as the government misgoverns at the center and creates incentive for people to distrust that government, the secessionist camp, gains in credibility, in numbers, and in momentum.
Sam, let's move away from the security side of things and talk about the economy. You mentioned it before, the lack of jobs. Well, in fact, the insecurity which creates this poor economic condition and the lack of jobs. How does Nigeria turn that around? The population is growing. How do we get to a point where actually those youth in Nigeria will have jobs and will have something to look forward to?
The lack of coherence in economic policy making, the failure of the government to increase or enhance freedom, especially economic freedom. The fact that Nigerian state continues to be one of the worst in terms of social protection in real sense, and the fact that policy like minimum wage and labor rights are not looked at as central to driving up economic well-being of the majority of the people, suggests that we continue to fail. About 7 million people are backed into poverty or gone to poverty as a result of the pandemic and related crisis in the last couple of years. And the president is promising 100 million to be taken out of poverty. So the central question here is three-pronged. One is policy. They need to get back to real economic policies that target, economic well-being of the people, create more opportunities. Job creation is, a rhetoric. You can't have job creation when the Nigerian state is a state that shares wealth, is not focusing on production. And the constitutional constraint to productivity in the country is what is driving the call for restructuring. You can't have an economy where states go to share revenue, federalize revenue, and they have no incentive to create revenue from bottom up. And so we are running not a political economy, and therefore job creation, stimulating private sector job creation will not be real except you are able to unlock the economy and reduce the power of the center and create incentive at subnational levels to engage private sector and create wealth. So the primary driver of this state failure could be economic stagnation, which arises both from the constitutional and the leadership failure and the normative failure that Nigerian politics has witnessed in the last 15 or 20 years, but primarily heightened under this government.
That's Sam Amadi with his thoughts on Nigeria's economic future. Sam, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, so security, or a lack of it, seems to be at the heart of a lot of Nigeria's issues, and that extends to arguably its most important sector, oil. Royal Dutch Shell has said it wants to sell its onshore oil facilities in Nigeria because of all the sabotage and theft. In fact, Shell's already sold a handful of its onshore oil blocks in the Niger Delta over the past decade because of community unrest and continued attacks on its oil installations. Now, that's come with its own subset of knock-on effects, if you like. In January, Shell was ordered to pay damages to farmers after an appeals court in The Hague found its Nigerian subsidiary was liable for oil spills in the Delta more than a decade ago. Shell has argued the spills were caused by sabotage and that it shouldn't be held accountable for the dealings of a foreign subsidiary. But environmental groups have argued Shell was to blame, at least for the poor maintenance and security of the oil pipes. Let's build on this now with energy analyst Ufuoma Oghoyone, who has worked in the Nigerian oil sector for more than 2 decades now. Great to have you with us and your expertise on this topic. Look, Shell's withdrawal, let's talk about that first. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Are there not local companies who could actually see this as an opportunity?
Shell's withdrawal is bad for the industry in Nigeria. And while I admit there are local companies there, they will not be able to fill in the gap Shell's leaving is going to create because they do not have the capacity to absorb the volume that Shell is able to produce. Don't forget that Shell has been a pioneer company in the industry in Nigeria, and they cater to about 50%, if not more, of Nigeria's production of oil and gas. The local companies will not be able to fill the shoes of Shell as they're pulling out.
Okay, and it blames the issues of sabotage and oil theft for the reason that it is leaving. I mean, how much responsibility? Again, we always talk about responsibility, whether it sits with the company or with the government on a security level.
The issue of sabotage is real, and it bites. It bites both the companies and the government. But when it comes to apportioning blame, I'm not particularly want to look at who to apportion blame to, but because the question has been asked this way, all the blames will go to the government, because the oil theft and the pipeline vandalization is able to happen because there's no security for the infrastructure. And Shell or any other of the oil companies, whether the foreign oil companies or the local oil companies, are not in the business of security. They are in the business of exploration and production of oil and gas. And so you couldn't lay blame for a security-dependent issue on any business, whether it be Shell, whether it be a cement manufacturing company, any business for that matter. So that blame goes squarely, 100% on the government.
And what about, correct me if I'm wrong, was there not some oil legislation that the Nigerian government has failed to pass? Would that have made a difference?
It's a legislation that time and event have overtaken. It's been about 21 years coming. And somehow, because of that legislation, there is so much talk about it now, and somehow we've managed to get ourselves stuck in a past that didn't exist. Where we are at the moment makes that piece of legislation redundant. And the problem of the oil and gas industry predates that legislation. And to just narrow it down to one piece of legislation whose time has already passed anyways, is to oversimplify the issue, really.
Oil is, and this could be in so many countries, it's either a blessing or a curse, or perhaps a little bit of both. In Nigeria's case, what happened to the oil wealth? Has it been squandered? Has it been lost? Is it, when I just look at the overall economic situation of the country and think about how much money can come in from oil, there's a disconnect there.
Yes, there is a disconnect, and there are reports after reports by many institutions, both local and international, that has exposed this disconnect that you're talking about. The other day, I was looking at a report from the World Bank as far back as 2001 or 2003, thereabout, and they made certain claims about corruption, being responsible for stuff. So the thing is this: the disconnect is there. You did ask what happened to the wells. The wells are there, but the thing with production wells is they age as well, and over time, the volume of crude or gas you're able to get from them will be depleting. However, Nigeria has made so much money from oil and gas, and it doesn't show on the streets. It doesn't show on on the, how would I put it now? In the
Well,
pockets of the average.
yeah, exactly. It doesn't show in everyday life for people there, and they are the people who don't have jobs and will end up wondering why are we not in a better situation? Why has that money been squandered? How did it happen?
It's a very interesting question. How did it happen? Well, it went into private pockets of some of the bourgeois in the country. It will take us hours if we want to go deep into this. And there is also the issue of not reinvesting into the industry. I mean, for example, as far back as 2015, those of us in the industry knew that there was a serious lack of investment that was required for the industry at the time. And you don't get something out of nothing. If you don't invest well in something, you're not going to get returns. And somehow we delude ourselves to believe that, oh yeah, we're always going to have oil, and so we're always going to have money. Yeah. Well, that's the height of delusion, because oil is a depleting resource. And apart from the fact that it's a depleting resource, where we are in the world today, some of the biggest consumers of oil in the West are beginning to gradually shift away from fossil fuel energy sources. And we're doing absolutely nothing about it. I worry that it might get to a point in my country where we'd have to be drinking our oil ourselves because the rest of the world no longer needs the commodity.
Goodness me. Fascinating talking to you, Ufuoma Oghoyone. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, piracy. Countries around the Gulf of Guinea are stepping up their security, trying to fight off a sharp rise in attacks by pirates. It's actually now the most dangerous area in the world for that, with nearly half of all the attacks this year, in an area stretching from Senegal in the north to Angola in the south. But of the 13 countries which have coasts on the Gulf of Guinea, it is Nigeria, which is one of the worst affected. Once again, Ahmed Idris with our report, this time from the port city of Lagos.
Nigeria tests out new equipment soon to be deployed at sea. It's an arsenal of ground, air, and sea vessels and equipment designed to tackle pirates operating in the Gulf of Guinea. Attacks in the region have grown in number and sophistication over the past 5 years.
It's very difficult to eradicate it, but our target is to see a zero tolerance of maritime insecurity within and beyond our own territorial waters. We have a complete gamut of land, air, and sea approach of assets that can handle the issue of this insecurity.
Countries in the region lose nearly $1 billion annually to pirate attacks. Many are carried out in Nigerian waters.
Many countries in West Africa and the Gulf of Guinea have tied their maritime security to that of the continent's biggest economy, and for good reason. A significant number of the 32 attacks carried out in the first quarter of 2021 happened in Nigeria's territorial waters. Ship operators hope with the country's deployment of additional vessels like this, 17 interceptor boats, 10 aircraft, including drones, will help to keep the number down.
In addition to the loss of lives and equipment, many businesses have closed.
There was a time in this country that we had almost 200 fleets, deep sea fishing trawlers. But due to the activities of the sea piracy and the various attacks, a lot of businesses have either fizzled out or relocated to neighboring countries.
And she says getting them back will be hard as new threats are emerging.
We have poachers that come from Europe and Asian countries. I mean, they steal our natural resources and they take the natural resources in the most irresponsible, unregulated manner.
Ship operators navigating the Gulf of Guinea now pay insurance premiums similar to what's paid by those in war zones, forcing some to avoid the region altogether. Officials in Nigeria hope the improved security force will restore confidence in merchants to once again ply the Gulf of Guinea.
And that is our show for this week, but I want to know what you think and what you want to see on the show as well. You can tweet or DM me at KamalAJE. The hashtag is AJCTC. The email address, if you prefer that, countingthecost@aljazeera.net. And as ever, there is more online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has entire episodes for you to catch up on whenever you'd like. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.